This lecture is the classification of pesticides. It has to deal with the different types or categories of pesticides, the pros and the cons, as well as how pesticides work and other types of integrated pest management or IPM that you need to know for the exam. So I'm going to go ahead and go really quickly through some of the classifications. We have herbicides. These are dealing with plants. Rodenticides. These are toxics about rodents. Fungicides. Nematicides. Or nematicides, pardon me, a toxic chemical for nematodes or roundworms. You have bactericides that kill bacteria, pesticides for unwanted species, and I'm not sure if I went through algicides, that's another one. You have two different types of characteristics. You have hard pesticides or soft pesticides, but to get the definition of what pesticides are, these are just substances either natural or synthetic that kill or control organisms that people consider pests. In the United States, over 227 million kilograms, that's about 500 pounds of pesticides, are applied to food, crops, cotton, fruit, and trees, and it accounts for about 1/3 of the worldwide pesticide use. When we look at the characteristics, again, you have hard pesticides. These are persistence, which means they're going to go up the food chain through bioaccumulation. Examples are DDT, atrazine, BT, malathion, and your glyphosate or your Roundup. Versus your soft pesticides, these are going to be reducing the risk. These are short-term and don't harm the environment. These include like soaps, oils, plants, extracts, baking soda, and dish liquid, and these are all safe for animals as well as going down the sink. So when we look at some of the pros and cons of, let me find that chart real quick. Here we go. Your pros and cons of your pest management is that for the pro, it kills unwanted pests. It can increase your food supply. Remember, you're trying to feed the world. It's effective and fast acting. You may have targeted pests versus overall spray. It reduces labor costs. Your food looks better. Your agriculture can be more profitable versus accumulating it up the food chain, which is bioaccumulation. Remember what we talked about earlier in class. We could build resistance and create more pesticides, pesticide runoff into lakes, waters, or even oceans. Destroying the bees, which is a $200 million issue that's going on, threatening other endangered species, affecting eggshells of birds. 5% actually reach the pest, and about 20,000 human deaths projected per year. So let's look at some more into depth of the classification. Let's look at some of the problems facing or problems associated with pesticide use. First is that they don't stay put. When you look at malathion or DDT, which was sprayed, only about 5% of herbicides that are applied to crops reach the target weeds, and they end up in the environment, or they have runoff into your streams and lakes. You have super pests. These are resistance to pesticide, like super pests, like the silver whitefly. They challenge farmers. And you have genetic resistance as well as overuse of antibiotics, looking at having that go up the food chain as well. Persistence, they stay in the environment as well as organisms for a very long time. Example is DDT. They bioaccumulate. We've talked about this word a lot, and you'll see this on the exam. Bioaccumulation or biomagnify. It increases the concentration of the chemical in the specific organs or the tissues, and it goes higher and higher up the food chain that you go, and it's stored in body fats. You can also form new pests. Example, DDT to controlled insect pests on lemon trees cause the outbreaks of a scale insect, which normally wasn't a problem beforehand. Food and water contamination, the spray goes for bugs, they go into the rivers and streams. And poisoning, you have short-term exposure, and that can result in harm to organs or even death, and you have long-term as well, and they can cause cancer. And children are at a greater risk than the adults. Some of the symptoms for pesticide poisoning are going to be nausea, vomiting, headache. More serious are going to be damage to the nervous system and other body organisms. A big one for the AP exam is the endocrine disruptor, which means it's going to change the endocrine system, and it's going to not allow a lot of breeding to happen because of the endocrine system. Well, how do they work? We'll talk about LD50 a little bit later on, but when we look at the nervous system, some interfere with the nervous system, example DDT, muscle twitching, or paralysis. Photosynthesis, they might prevent photosynthesis from happening. Example, it prevents the chlorophyll formation. You also have smothering. The vapors is going to kill that pests. Dehydration, where it's going to change the type of wax outer covering, and therefore it's going to dehydrate those cells. Inhibition of blood clotting, where animals, especially rats, they bleed to death. The ideal pesticide is at night, or the nightmare insect pest, is to kill only the target pest and not everything around it. Conversely, when you look at Roundup or glyphosate, whatever it touches, it kills. So it's not a target. It would be more of a general. It caused genetic resistance in the target organism, and it disappears or breaks down into harmless chemicals after doing its job. So the ideal pesticide would kill only the organism for which it was intended to do. And again, it would be broken down with chemicals that are not harm any biological organisms. However, they don't exist. When we look at when it breaks down into safer materials such as water, carbon dioxide, or oxygen, it would stay exactly where it was put and not move around the environment. But again, it doesn't exist. Some of the laws you need to know for the exam. With the EPA and the USDA, you have laws. Kind of get to them really quickly. First off, farmers have days to harvest. That's the last day they can spray any type of crops before they harvest them for consumption. They also have restrictions with labels. The first one is the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. This was strengthened in 1996, and this sets pesticides to tolerant levels. The slide that you briefly looked at was the LD50. We'll talk about that more with water, but they are very restricted to those tolerance levels for being toxic to humans as organisms. So this has to also do with the label requirement. So looking at signal words and symbols, precautionary statement, reentry statement, direction for use, etc. The other one is FERPA. This is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. It was first established in 1947 and revised in 96. It states what must be on the pesticide label and requires registration of all pesticides. Last, you have the Food Quality Protection Act. It was established in 1966 and amends both FERPA and the FFDCA. Those you need to know for the AP exam. The last one you want to know for the AP exam is Rachel Carson. She wrote a book called Silent Spring. She lived from 1907 to 64, and that was her famous work. Her contributions with the environmental movement was about pesticide sprays and how they are harmful and they kill insects, but the good and the bad, but they still it bioaccumulates up the food chain. Her contributions of Silent Spring and heightened the public awareness of concern of the dangers of uncontrolled uses, especially of DDT, and it got it out to the community and educated people. The last thing before we close is the Integrated Pest Management, IPM, which you need to know for the AP exam. This is a limited use of pesticides along with other practices, which we will talk about in class tomorrow. But other ways to control pests may be fool the pest through cultivation practices, implant genetic resistance. So this is where GMO comes in. Bring in natural enemies, use pheromones to lure pests into traps, maybe use hormones to disrupt the life cycles. And we'll get into more cultural methods tomorrow that include physical as well as biological methods. And I will end work. Let's see. And that is it.